My name is Andrea Salazar, and I studied journalism at the University of Valparaiso. Although being a student and a future reporter in this country in 1982 is no easy task, it was a turbulent time under a regime that crushed freedom of expression and censored any news that contradicted the official version. But I grew up hearing stories of injustice and enforced silence, and I decided not to stand idly by. Still, I never imagined that my passion for uncovering the truth would lead me to a shelter, a building nestled in a neighborhood. The coastal area of the Valparaiso region had been abandoned for a few years, and few people spoke about it. Its walls say it once housed a psychiatric hospital that mysteriously closed without any clear explanation to the community. Rumors have it that terrible things happened inside, from illegal experiments to torture disguised as therapy. It was this murmur of clandestine experiments that caught my attention. I'd heard of hidden detention centers, but I never thought a psychiatric hospital could be part of such a sinister system. However, the more I investigated, the more evidence I found that something dark was happening behind its walls. I learned about the hospice by chance when I interviewed a former municipal official who preferred to remain anonymous. He told me that in the late 1970s, a special group took control of the place. Shortly after, the hospital was vacated and closed under the guise of maintenance, and overnight, the people admitted they'd disappeared. Some say they were transferred to other facilities, but there are no official records to confirm this. As I read through old archives in my university library, I found scattered references. I remembered the press release announcing its opening in the 1930s, a few brief notes about budget conflicts, and suddenly silence. Nothing explained the final closure. Only a note mentioned the nickname the locals had given it, the Hospice of the Seven Eyes. But why that name? It was then that I decided to investigate on my own. I managed to contact a guard at the location named Arnaldo. He agreed to speak with me if I promised not to reveal his full identity. We agreed to meet at a secluded cafe near the port. There, between sips of tea and nervous glances, he told me bits and pieces of what he had experienced. There was a sealed section where they took people who didn't know it, sick if not scared. The doctors were dressed in white and men in olive green were watching over me. They closed everything. I feared that direct preference would also disappear. The ward with the 7 eyes haunted my dreams. I decided to see with my own eyes. The eyes that remained of that hospital. One November morning, I gathered my notebook, my portable recorder, a flashlight, and whatever courage I had left. I took a bus to the coastal area of the former hospital he described. After a 20-minute walk along a dusty road, peeling walls and a rusty gate leading to the sign Hospicio appeared before my eyes. The remaining letters had fallen, but that eerie word was still visible. It was midday, yet the place seemed plunged into darkness. Steadily, I climbed over the gate, careful not to catch my clothes. Weeds were growing in the front yard. I felt like an intruder and my heartbeat quickened. Although the building's facade featured boarded-up windows, a side door stood ajar. It seemed to invite or warn us. I took a deep breath and finally crossed the threshold. The first thing I noticed was a musty, confined smell, an aroma of an old hallway and stale incense mixed with the unmistakable scent of abandonment. The walls, once painted hospital green. I heard cracks. An oppressive silence dominated the place. I turned on my flashlight and took my first steps. From that moment on, my view of the world would change forever. In the main hallway, the detained Moraleses kept children's drawings. Sun, clouds, poorly painted flowers. I imagined it was the least risky section, perhaps where patients with mild disorders lived. I shuddered to think that people had lived there whom, for one reason or another, the system had marginalized and forgotten. The floor was covered with light debris, some of which. Another old syringe. The echo of my footsteps resonated like a drum in the silence. Wandering around the adjacent wings, I came across old rusty stretchers, broken filing cabinets on the wall, the inscription, "I see what you don't see." The line looked like it was made with chalk or charcoal. The phrase unsettled me, for it evoked a warning. Perhaps someone had discovered something they shouldn't have. I rummaged through some papers on a counter, but found only unimportant sheets with faded dates from the previous decade. At the end, a second corridor led me to a staircase that I was descending into a basement. I hesitated to go further down as the darkness was thicker and the air more stale there. I remembered Arnaldo's words, there was a forbidden area, could that be it? I swallowed and turned the flashlight on more brightly. Halfway down, I noticed some strange spots on the wall. They looked like circles drawn in dark paint, 7 circles arranged in a row. Each had a dot in the center like an iris. I thought, those were the supposed 7 eyes. As I shone the flashlight on something, my gut told me that The symbol was important. My heart pounded, and for a second I wanted to hear a distant murmur, a whisper that could be the wind or something else. I entered a large room, perhaps an old group therapy room. The roof was leaking and light filtered through a vent, illuminating a small corner. There, I saw a dusty record like a large leather notebook with a broken lock. I opened it carefully. Inside were medical notes, but the handwriting was uneven, sometimes with apricots and other symbols. Case 13B transferred on September 11, 1979. Diagnosis: subversive paranoia. Therapy: isolation and electroshock. Outcome uncertain. Its product: intense nightmares and hallucinations. I request to keep him in the Seven Eyes ward. My blood ran cold. Subversive paranoia. How was political subversion diagnosed as paranoia? My suspicions grew, and perhaps they used the hospice as a psychiatric detention and torture center. Or perhaps for experiments on political dissidents. The military regime was capable of anything, and that thought horrified me. I pressed on with the notebook. In my hand, turning pages, I found constant references to Ward 7. There was a diagram showing sealed, windowless rooms where extreme treatments were practiced. Shiver after shiver, I went down to the basement. I felt like with each step I descended into a truth far darker than I had ever imagined. This basement consisted of a long corridor with metal doors on both sides, like padded cells. Some doors were wide open, others locked with rusty padlocks. The air was unbreathable. I covered my nose with my handkerchief, turned on the flashlight, and the mattresses inside those cells looked torn, with foam oozing out the sides. There was a smell of stale urine and mold permeating the air. In one of the cells, I found an electroshock chair plugged into a wall, with wires hanging from the ceiling. It was covered in indefinable stains. I felt nauseous. My instinct told me something atrocious had happened there, something beyond legitimate medicine. That's when I suddenly heard a noise behind me like a shuffling of. I froze at that moment and turned off the flashlight, afraid that someone or something could see me. I crouched behind an overturned piece of furniture, straining my ears. This shuffling sound repeated itself very slowly. Was there someone else exploring the place? A homeless person, a soldier, or a patient who never left? My mind was racing, and I suddenly imagined the possibility that one of the inmates might have been trapped there, surviving on who knows what. Terror and compassion quietly mingled in my chest. I peeked out, and a faint ray of light filtering through a broken doorway revealed a human shadow moving in the darkness. I tried to back away quietly, but my foot hit a piece of metal, emitting a clang that resonated like an explosion in the silence. That figure stopped dead in its tracks. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it sharply in its direction. There he was, about 8 meters away, a thin man with disheveled hair and ragged clothes, staring into space. His eyes looked enormous, and his pale skin, flushed, revealed a prolonged confinement. He opened his mouth and let out a moan, and without thinking, I ran to help him. It was a strange mix of adrenaline and quiet fear. "I'm not going to hurt you," I told him. He turned his head as if he didn't understand me. Then he stammered something that sounded like, "Don't look at the eyes, and staggered off toward the other hallway. I followed him for a few steps, but he moved quickly, and darkness swallowed him up in a matter of seconds. I was stunned. What did he mean by no? He looked at the eyes after recovering from the shock. I continued my walk, looking for a control room, a medical office where I could find more documents. I went through another hallway with numbered doors and came to a locked room. The wooden pick was old, so I pushed hard until it finally gave. The room opened up. An office, a desk, a metal filing cabinet, and a couple of cabinets. I searched the drawers. I found skull x-rays, files labeled with official seals, and to my dismay many of them didn't have their names on them. Of the patient, but obj 2s9b codes. I read excerpts about increasing electric shocks to induce trance states. The subject mentioned Latin phrases and experienced extreme dices. I felt a chill that turned my stomach. They were doing experiments with substances, electroshock, and who knows what else. All of them were methods to extract information or manipulate minds. Perhaps in another drawer, I found a folder sealed with the National Coat of Arms and the word confidential in capital letters. Inside was a document titled, "The Seven Eyes Project described a hypothesis that struck me as insane, combining psychiatric treatments with deep suggestion practices, supposedly to cure subversive behaviors." It said that in certain cases, archetypes of fear were invoked to subdue the inner will. It bordered on the occult and another twisted form of extreme psychology. I began recording with my small tape recorder, describing the place and reading excerpts from the files. I was aware that it was a cyber bomb. If I could get those documents out of there, I would have solid proof of the atrocities committed during the dictatorship, but I had to be cautious. I was risking the intelligence services chasing me without realizing I had this evidence. As I spoke in a low voice, the microphone, something creaked on the floor behind me. I turned, tense, but saw no one, only an old hallway that faded into shadows. I remembered the man who had escaped, mumbling. Perhaps he was watching me from some corner, afraid of me as much as I was of him. I decided to leave that office to see if I could find any trace of that stranger, as I suspected he could give me crucial testimony. I walked to the other side where the air was thicker. I came across a door where Pavilion C was the key. I protected the handle and it was locked with a bolt. I used a rusty piece of iron to force the lock, which took several minutes to do. Finally, the door slammed shut with a creak that reverberated off the walls. Inside, a large room dimly lit by a broken skylight and black paint on the walls. I noticed the 7 circles resembling eyes again. A chill ran over my skin. In the center were metal beds with straps, and in the corners were strange devices that looked like old surveillance cameras. Some lenses were broken or torn off. Suddenly, a door opened by itself at the far end, perhaps pushed by a breeze I didn't perceive. I entered that kind of Zelda and immediately regretted it. It was small, with padded walls. On them were symbols traced with some dried liquid. Perhaps it was blood. When I shone the flashlight on them, I thought I saw suffering faces. I thought they were hallucinations of my tired mind until I clearly made out the silhouette of an eye with 7 pupils and an abyss staring back at me. Suddenly, I felt dizzy. An intense buzzing sound struck my ears and I almost fell to the floor. It was as if that symbol were sending me a malevolent vibration. I managed to recover and step back, but my hands were shaking. What had they done here? Some kind of ritual? Or something like that? I staggered out. They get inside your head. He brought his hands to his face, scratching as if he were trying to get something out of his eyelids. Suddenly, a spasm swept through him and he started to run. I ran after him, but he turned a corner and when I reached him, he was gone. Instead, I found a broken window that led outside. Perhaps he had escaped through there. I tried to reach the window to get out too, but a shattering noise resounded inside, like a tremendous blow from deep within. An echo spread through the corridors and I almost felt the building breathing. I wondered if there were more people in there. Panic made me think it was time to escape. I had enough photos and notes, I had the recorder with evidence. Yes, I had to leave before risking my life or sanity, or so I thought as I ran. Turning into a hallway, I came across an open door I didn't remember. Peeking inside, I discovered a makeshift lab with shelves full of dusty vials and a desk piled high with folders in the center. There was something resembling an isolation tank like the ones used in sensory therapy. Panic told me to leave, but my journalistic instinct told me to take one last look. I walked through the door and felt a chilly air. Suddenly, I heard a whisper, almost a breath, next to my ear. If you stay, you'll see more than you want. I couldn't find anyone. A chill pierced me. Then my flashlight illuminated the tank, and one of its sides was dented as if someone had punched it. Violently, the red-painted lid slid open. There was another sinister 7-eyed creature. I tried to open one of the gold drawers, but it was stuck. I peered hard, and the wood broke, sending a bundle of loose papers and a photo falling to the floor. It showed a man in a white coat next to 2 people in military uniform. The women in the background seemed sedated or unconscious. I recognized the man in the coat from other clippings. He was a psychiatrist linked to DINA, one of the repressive agencies. I swallowed and I had the final PR. At that moment, a loud bang echoed in the hallway. I heard heavy footsteps like boots. I turned off the flashlight and held my breath. My mind was racing. Soldiers, guards, a ghost, whatever it was, I didn't want to find out. I grabbed the papers and the photo, stuffed them into my bag, and hurriedly tiptoed out of the dark room, trying not to make a sound, toward the main staircase, feeling along the wall to get my bearings. My only thought was to return to the side door through which I had entered. The shadows stretched out like arms that wanted to grab me. I heard a pounding in my temples and a buzzing that reminded me of the stories of that supposed mental monster. Finally, I saw the dim light coming from outside through the crack in the door. I ran without looking back and, in a few seconds, I jumped over the gate. My heart was about to burst out of my chest. Once outside, the fresh air made me cry with relief. I walked away without looking back, with the strange feeling of having escaped from a burrow of hell. I arrived at my boarding house with my shoes covered in dust and my soul full. Fearful, I locked my room and checked the tape recorder. Although my voice trembled so much that the narration was intermittent, I reviewed the photos I managed to take with my small camera. I had images of the documents, some key spaces in the hospice, the painted symbols with 7 eyes, all of which were still in the memory. It was enough to put together an explosive report. But I knew that simply possessing this evidence put me in danger. We lived under a regime that persecuted those who denounced its crimes. I had to decide how to disseminate it. I contacted a university professor, who sympathized with the opposition. I showed him the material and his face fell. He recognized a couple of regime officials and warned me that publishing it could cost me my life. Still, I believed the truth deserved to come out. Weeks after my escape from the hospice, I had nightmares at night. I saw myself locked in that cell, surrounded by eyes staring at me and whispering my name. Sometimes I would hear the man telling me not to look into his eyes, waking me up in a cold sweat. Nevertheless, my determination to expose what I had experienced remained. Maybe I can't do it in a major official media outlet, but there are clandestine channels and incident reports that could publish it. I knew it was dangerous, but also that silence perpetuated impunity. Arnaldo, the former teacher, agreed to testify anonymously. As for the man wandering the halls, no one else has seen him. Part of me suspected he was still lurking around, possessed by the plot. A sinister influence wondered how many more people were trapped like this, how many experiments. Inhumans had been carried out a few weeks before publishing the article. The media outlet where the errors were going to be made suddenly recommended that I desist, and I didn't just receive a recommendation from that outlet. The former student, my teacher, and I were threatened. While we wanted to show the truth, it just wasn't possible. When you find yourself fighting against a regime, they simply tie your hands, and you then decide whether it's more important to tell the truth or preserve your life and that of your family and loved ones. All the evidence was collected and we were under investigation and observation for quite some time, until they finally realized we weren't going to do anything more, and so it happened. We did absolutely nothing. Only these words remain, but they could easily pass for any other story.